Before I get to the excerpt proper, I would like to add a little preface at the front after the fact of recording it to make some clarifications and or corrections. So first, this excerpt was designed originally to be spoiler free. So you don't have to worry about spoilers for the Infinity series. However, at the end, I will show the artwork for the covers and the on the actual discs themselves of some of the ports of the games. So next will be pictures of the artwork. That's retail artwork, but that artwork for one or more of the games may contain spoilers for the game. In other words, the cover artist may have put something on the cover that it seems clear when you play the game that the writers of the text didn't want you to know. And these spoilers could be potentially the worst possible spoiler you could possibly draw. So keep that in mind. Although, if in order to actually purchase the game, it's very unlikely you'd be able to do that without actually seeing this cover art. But when that happens, it should be marked off by the chapters feature in YouTube. Okay, secondly, but other than that, it's going to be spoiler free. So that's the only thing you have to worry about is the cover art for the games, when I show the games. Secondly, I say that the TLWiki was somehow part of the Internet Archive. That was something I said because I was extremely under-researched. The TLWiki is not part of the Internet Archive. It was its own separate thing. It was a community of fans of Japanese visual novels that worked on translating those visual novels to English. The site went down, and the only thing I could source that gives me a hint about the timeline of that was a tweet by someone with Twitter username thiskanji, which I don't know how to pronounce, but that's the kanji, and had a handle at Mookie0. And the tweet was made on February 13th, 2019. And the tweet said that the TLWiki is down indefinitely. So by that time, it probably happened earlier, but at least by 2019, and this is being reported at the end of January of 2023, so that's about 4 years ago, the TLWiki became no more. The person who was in charge of it and was paid to keep the servers up, to keep the paying the web hosting fees, disappeared, and it's gone. And all of the work that they did, the English patches that they created, some of them I can't find, like the one for Remember 11. I can find the whole thing patched, but I can't find just the patch, right? So I can't avoid piracy with the patch. Some of them you can find. So it kind of got scattered all over the internet. Their work got scattered all over the internet when it dissolved, and some of it was lost in that process. To those who were once part of the TLWiki and worked on translating these visual novels to English, as a visual novel fan, I greatly appreciate the work that you did in making these accessible to somebody like me and other Americans like me, lazy Americans who haven't bothered to learn Japanese. And you did it without being paid. You just did it as a hobby because that's just what you wanted to do. And I'm finding that although it's very unlikely that I will get involved in translating games myself, but it's possible. The possibility exists. It's not out of the question. And if I somehow manage to get the know-how to be able to decompose games and actually get into it, then I can actually pick up trying to do this myself. Lastly, this isn't really a correction, but it's actually like a further research, a resolution. As for the issue with the background the opening cutscene of Ever17 in Japanese on Windows 10, I can confirm that has to do with trying to install the Japanese version while the English version from Hirameki is already installed. That does not come from Windows 10. That comes from a conflict between two installs of similar games. If I install it on a Windows 10 PC that it does not have the English version installed, I do not see that problem. Okay. So the only problems remaining for the Japanese version of Ever17 on Windows 7 this is the font. It's the narrow font that happens. Everything else seems to work fine. So with all those corrections out of the way, I can roll the actual excerpt. Thank you. Following is a survey of the availability of the Infinity series in its entirety. So this includes Never 7, Ever 17, Remember 11, 12 Ribbon, and Code 18. Somewhere in here, although I won't say where because I'll make it worse. No, I'll hold off on that. So I'll just say that this is a survey of the availability of the Infinity series. So let's start with Never 7. So the first part we have is the original PlayStation port, which was released on March 23rd, 2000, and it was released only in Japan in the Japanese language. The title of the game is Infinity, and because the title of the game is Infinity, it wasn't released as Never 7, the end of Infinity. It was released as just Infinity, which makes it hard to search. Because if you would search Infinity PlayStation game, like on eBay or Amazon, that is so vague, you don't get results. But it's just so vague, you get a lot of results. However, I have scrolled through that, and I haven't found a single entry of what looks like what would later be named Never 7. I also, though, know that one of the early ports of Never 7 did not have the most important part of the game's contents. It did not have the most important part of the story. That was added later. In fact, Never 7 as a game has sort of a weird structure, which I can't, because this is supposed to be a spoiler-free video, I'm not going to say the exact details of, but there's a structure that kind of suggests something strange happened there. You'll know what I mean if you've played Never 7. I believe that the port that doesn't have that most important part of the story, because it was kind of held off as a tease, is the original PlayStation port, especially considering that it's entitled Infinity, and the Neo Geo Pocket port released later that year was titled Infinity Cure, pronounced incorrect intentionally. So that suggests that it's missing the most important part of the game. As such, this is, if you want to actually buy a version of Never 7, this is not a very good version to buy if you can actually find it, which to me, as it seemed, rather scarce, and I couldn't actually find any of these being sold secondhand. The PS also the PlayStation does have region locking. Which means that it's likely that the original PlayStation port Never 7 only ran on a Japanese region PlayStation. There is a way to get around the region locking on a PlayStation. I have not done it. I don't know how to do it. I just know it exists. So I know there is a way to hack a PlayStation so that it will run foreign games if your original PlayStation is not a Japanese region one. So the next port is the PS2 port. I'm trying to kind of organize this by category, so this isn't necessarily in chronological order. It was released on May 22nd, 2003, and again, it was only released in Japan and only in the language Japanese. It goes on eBay for pretty cheap, it's in the low 20s. However, you do find some people trying to sell it for more. The PS2 also had region locking, so it may be region locked to Japan. So this may only run on a Japanese region PlayStation 2. I also know that there is a hack to get around this. I have never done it. I do not know how to do it, but I do know it exists. the port for the Neo Geo Pocket. If you don't know what a Neo Geo Pocket is, it's an obscure gaming console that was never released in North America, only Europe and Japan. The game was released under the title Infinity Cure, and this was the second time that it was released. The Neo Geo Pocket cartridge for Ever17, for Infinity Cure, as it was called, for Infinity Cure, goes in the mid 100s on eBay. Hundreds is like 150, those kind of prices. And it's relatively easy to find listings for. It's not really that scarce. It was, of course, released only in Japan, and I presume it was really, and I actually don't presume, I actually managed to look this one up. I know for certain that Infinity Cure was only released for the Japanese Neo Geo Pocket, so it will only run on a Japanese one and not a European one. Next, the Dreamcast port, released a couple months later on December 21st, 2000, at the Sega Dreamcast. And it was, of course, released only in Japanese language in Japan. It usually goes for less than $20 on eBay. The Dreamcast does have region locking, so you need a Japanese region Dreamcast. The Dreamcast can be emulated, although I am not familiar with any process how easy it is to dump the ROM of a Dreamcast disc. So, all the emulators I know of, you need an ISO. They don't actually run something out of the disk drive. Next, the PC port. It was released on October 26th, 2001, so almost a whole year after the Dreamcast port. And it was released only in Japan with it was released in Japan, and it was only released in Japanese. But the fans have developed a fan translation for it that you can apply. Is extremely scarce. Essentially, it's unobtainable. I have it because I managed to catch one in the Infinity Plus box set, which I bought off of Amazon.co.jp, and it was the only seller selling the only copy that was there at the time. So I got the last one, and the seller wouldn't ship overseas, so I had to freight forward it. But anyway, if you've been watching my Ever17 videos, you'll know I have this, and it's hard to get. And that's how I got mine. But I've never managed to find it standalone, just like by itself. I've only found it in the box set and like once. So pretty rare, pretty unobtainable. You also have difficulty running it on Windows 10 or Windows 10-like systems like Windows 11. I don't have a Windows 11 system, so I wasn't able to try it on that. Basically, it will decide not to launch sometimes. In fact, more often than it will decide to launch. Like, it'll just click on the executable, it just won't launch. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It does not seem... I did install it on Windows 7, and it doesn't appear to have this problem on Windows 7. And it seems to launch reliably every time when I call for it. So that's one problem it has that you get with it on Windows 10. The second one is that it doesn't full screen properly. If you launch on full screen, instead of just having the correct aspect ratio, and if you have like a wide screen like 1080p, it'll just put black bands on the side. That's how it's supposed to go. Instead, it will go corner to corner. So move the corners of the game, like the gameplay field, to the corners of the screen and stretch the aspect ratio horizontally. Or if you have an ultra wide, even more so, right? It does not do this on Windows 7. On Windows 7, it actually full screened properly. I wasn't able to capture that on recording very well because OBS doesn't capture full screen well like that, but it did full screen properly on Windows 7. And lastly, on Windows 10, the font gets messed up, where the Japanese characters get squished horizontally, so they're all skinny, and the space between them is widened. So it's like each letter starts in the right place. So like the space, the space between the lower left corner of each character is correct, but the characters are squished. So it's like a squished character in a wide space and a squished character in a wide space. And of course, that does not happen on Windows 7. And lastly, it requires a play disc in order for the background music to run. So it comes as 2 discs. One's at least on the box set. Maybe if you got the standalone version from 2001, it might have come as like 4 discs. But on the box set, it comes as 2. So one of them you install the game with. It also has this menu on it that's supposed to be smart and find the game if you have it installed and also allow you to play it. And the second disc that you need to insert into your optical drive in order for the background music to play. This disc also works as an audio CD, I believe. Like you stick it in your car and you can play like the background music for Ever17 while you're driving. It'll still play if you don't have this disc in your disc drive. It just won't have any background music. It's like a way of having like giving you the background music with the game and also being an anti-piracy measure to some extent. So long as the pirates actually care about background music. Then there's a version that was released for Mac on March 3rd, 2005, using, I think, a service called GameX or something. It was in Japanese, and only in Japanese. And you had to pay 1,000 yen for the first 100 hours of gameplay time, and then 500 yen for every 50 hours more additionally. Which to me is a gamer's nightmare. If I have to pay for like time in a game, like installment wise, that sounds absolutely terrible. I don't know when that stopped. It just sounds nuts. Okay. Next, the PSP port. So it was released in March 12, 2009, and it was released in Japanese only in Japan. But there is a fan translation to English, where you have to dump the ISO, apply the fan translation, and then you can either put it back on your PSP, like if you hack your PSP so it can play it off a flash drive, or you can play it on an emulator. Goes for more than 50 on eBay is how I wrote it. The PSP can be emulated, of course. I found a user on Reddit that reported a persistent crash. Meaning he found a crash that happened every single time. And he was able to get around it because he was playing on his actual PSP. He was able to import his save file into PPSSPP and then use PPSSPP to get around the crash somehow and then put that back on his PSP. But somebody did encounter a crash, so you might too, using the fan translation. Apparently, you can play it on a Vita somehow. I don't know how. I'm just noting that down there. And also, the PSP is not region locked. It's region free. So you don't have to worry about getting a Japanese PSP. Any PSP should be able to play it. Now, there were Android and iOS ports that came out in 2013. I know nothing about them. I would appreciate some information about them in the comments. Because I know these exist, I just can't find any information about them. Next is the PC DMM digital version of an unknown release I didn't know, and it's in Japanese. So this is digital, and you buy it digitally. You get it by digital download, and you have to be Japanese in order to do so. So you need to be in Japan or use a VPN to pretend to be in Japan. Because it's still available from the original publisher, I don't know if Mage we consider it the original publisher, but it's the copyright holder. The game as a whole is not technically abandonware, or it is not technically vaulted. That being said, many of the individual ports are, right? So it's like PSP is the only platform, and because they're not selling it worldwide, unlike the original ports, although they only sold them in Japan, you could theoretically like import a used one, right? But with digital, you can't really that possibility. It's more restrictive that way. So it's not like they're not selling it for PlayStation or stuff like that anymore. But any of the game in general, any and all versions, yes, there is still a version of it that is still being sold. There is, as the fan translation of the old physical version, which I have, and I've used it and it works. that does work. The chances of it working on the DMM version are vanishingly small. Again, I don't have the DMM version, so I can't actually confirm that the fan translation for the original doesn't work, but it likely does not work. And then last I checked, the cost of it was 1628 yen. Just kind of an FYI, because I forgot to mention it back when I was talking about the PC physical port. It appears like the fan translation to English, which is not the whole game, by the way, it's just one little executable that you run that translates the game that you already have. Tries to get around this whole you need the play disc to play the background music thing, and it doesn't work. Now, it still works if you run the CD version and you have the play disc in, so the play disc still works on it. It's just that you still need the play disc. Anyway. And it seems like they tried to get around that and it didn't work. Okay. So talk about the DMM version. And then lastly, we have what's called the Eternal Edition. So the Eternal Edition is a fan port to the Love 2D engine. That I believe started out at about April of 2020 is when it was first created. Now, it's only in English. So it's meant to be an English translation. There is no Japanese version as far as I know, making it unique in that way. And it's considered by the fans to be the best way to play the game. Now, because it's fan created, there's no way to buy it and pay mages for it, right? So it's essentially a piracy-only thing. And it's extremely unlikely that the people who created this and took the background music and the sprites and the backgrounds and the story and poured them into Love 2D actually talked to mages about it. So it's likely just completely and utterly piracy. Just kind of, yeah. There are a whole bunch of versions out there of it. One of them is like that you can find on the Internet Archive as portable. It's like has a bunch of DLLs with the executable, so you can run it without actually installing Love 2D engine. But the latest version is version V0.4, and that one came out on February 2nd, 2022. Now, I did a Let's Play of the Eternal Edition, but my Let's Play was created before version V0.4 came out, so it must have been some earlier version, and I don't know which earlier version it was. But it wasn't the latest one. There's been a later one since I came out with mine. And I think there's my Ever17, not Ever17, Never 7 Part 35. Never 7 Part 35 is a link in the description of that to where you can download the executable version for V0.4. For that version to work, you need to have the Love 2D engine installed on your system. It's not portable. You actually need to have the engine as well. It does not duplicate all of the details of the original PC version that you get off a physical disk. This not necessarily have the requirement that it does that, right? I'm not going to complain. I'm just kind of saying that as information. The original PC version had a rainbow text box that I think it shares with memories off. And when you did something, it had like this rotating star thing. And when you like clicked a button, like stars would fly. The Eternal Edition does not replicate that. Also, the menus for the clear list, like the list of endings you've unlocked and scenes and stuff, those have a special background, a special format. At least the version of the Eternal Edition I played does not duplicate that either. So it's not like it needs to do that. Like the actual story, background, sprites, text, that's all fine, like at least by my standards, but it's not like it's an exact replication of the original PC version. There are differences visually to it. And the motivation behind creating this was basically that the original doesn't run well on Windows 10, right? It sometimes decides to not launch. So this is, and the Eternal Edition does, right? So it's kind of a preservation effort to make Ever17 still playable in English on later versions of Windows, because there's no, I don't think the English fan translation would work on the DMM version. It works on the old disk version, and the old disk version does not work well on Windows 10. It's also this is not really an excuse for these pirate ports, but it's also extremely hard to get a hold of, legitimately. I mean, you can get a hold of it like scumbaggedly, but you can get bootleg versions of it. But a legitimate copy is really hard to get a hold of. Okay, so that's all for Ever17. Let's go through all the ports and their availability for Ever17. So first you have the PS2 port, which released on August, spelled wrong because this needs to be a U. I know how to spell August, it just didn't seem to happen that time in my life. Okay. August 29th, 2002, and it was released only in Japan, in Japanese. It goes for on eBay as low as $28, but most people are trying to sell it for more than that. Particularly if it's the limited edition, then it really goes for a lot. The PS2 did have region locking, so it may be region locked to Japan, and you may have to have a Japanese region, PS2 specifically, in order for it to run. It is possible to bypass this. I have never done it. I don't know how to do it. I just know that it's possible. Then also at the same time, they released it for the Sega Dreamcast. Again, also only in Japan. You can import it, but it was only like sold commercially from the manufacturer in Japan. In the Japanese language only. It usually goes for around $30 on eBay. The Dreamcast has region locking. You do need a Japanese region Dreamcast in order for it to run. The Dreamcast can be emulated, but I'm not very familiar with Dreamcast emulators, nor the process of actually dumping the ROM so you can do the emulation. But I just know it can be emulated. There are emulators out there for it. Okay, next port, PC. This was released October 16th, 2003 in Japanese only, and only in the Japanese language. It's extremely scarce and essentially unobtainable. Again, I have one because I have the Infinity Plus box set, but I got the last copy that was on Amazon.co.jp that there was, and now there isn't one. And I did see it, like somebody list it standalone. I also saw it listed on Amazon standalone. But again, there was no one actually selling it. It was just like a page for it. You couldn't actually buy it. So I haven't seen an opportunity to actually buy a secondhand copy of the PC port in Japanese for Ever17 as of yet. And it only once for the box set that contains it, I just snatched it up immediately. So to be clear, the HIMMEL patch cannot translate this to English. If you try to apply the HIMMEL patch and launch it, you get the error VLG load, file load error, Hirameki.cps. So, it doesn't work. You can't use the HIMMEL patch as a fan translation. It does not appear to require the physical disk to play after install, right? You just install it, and once you've installed it, it'll still play even if you don't have the disk. Doesn't have the play disk protection thingy that Ever7 does. It only in the box set, at least, it only comes as one disk, basically. On Windows 10, there are issues. So the first one is the intro cutscene does not play. Now, here's the problem with this. I installed it, right? And then the intro cutscene, the video part of it didn't play. You basically just get a white screen with the music playing. But then later on, I decided to try launching my English install of the Hirameki commercial translation. And the intro video did not play on that either. And I was like, what in the world? What I changed was I installed a copy of the Japanese version after I installed the English version. I was like, what? So it may not actually be a Windows 10 problem. It may actually be like a problem of having both of them at the same time installed. I tried deleting the Japanese version. It didn't actually change it. It didn't change it back. Like the intro cutscene on my my install for my Hirameki translation is our Hirameki version is like permanently broke now. Anyway, so it may be a Windows 10 problem, but it may actually be like multiple different versions installed and something weird happened. I did check the file sizes and made sure they were the same as like a fresh English install, and the English version, they're all the same. So on all like the .e17 files in the movies folder. I didn't try MD5 checksums though. Anyway, the font's also messed up. In the same way the Never17 font is messed up, the letters all end up all squished on Windows 10. I did install it on Windows 7, and the intro cutscene did flag, and that may not be a Windows 10 issue specifically, but anyway, it does work on Windows 7. It does not have that font issue either, so everything works fine on Windows 7. Kind of as a note, the Ever17, I said that the physical for Ever7. Oh, I'm getting all mixed up. The physical for Never7 doesn't full screen right? The aspect ratio gets warped on Windows 10. On Windows 10, the physical for Ever17 in Japanese does full screen properly. So it also launches consistently. So the only problem that it retains from Never7 is the font problem, and potentially a intro cutscene problem. And if it's an intro cutscene problem, potentially a problem with later cutscenes in the game, because there's other ones, right, where like there's other cutscenes later in the game. They're like small, they're not very long, but they happen. Those could have issues too, potentially. Anyway, I just didn't get that far in the game. Check that. Then there was also this Gaming X service, or Game X service version of it on Mac as well, which also started on March 3rd, 2005, only in Japanese, and it had this whole like pay for time scheme that I described for Never7. Now the PSP port, released on March 12th, 2009, the PSP ports are all released in 2009, is released only in Japanese, but there is a fan translation that you can use to translate it to English. Goes for over $50 on eBay. You can apply a fan translation after doing a ROM dump. PSP can be emulated, of course. Is playable on the Vita, hacked Vita, that is. And a PSP is not region locked. You can play it on any and all PSPs. Android and iOS, again, I don't know, released in 2015, January 15th, 2015. Again, I don't know anything about these, whether or not these are still up, what the regions they're being sold in are, any of that. So if anybody has information about these, please let me know in the comments. All I know is they exist and what date they're released. Nothing else, nothing really more about them. The DMM version, unknown release date, and also unknown takedown date, because it's no longer up there as far as I can tell. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find DMM version for Ever17, but I could find one for Remember 11 and Ever7. You need to be in Japan or use a VPN to pretend that you are in Japan. And because it might still be available, I put might specifically in this entry as opposed to in Never7 and Remember 11's entries because I couldn't find it, then it might not be vaulted. It may actually still be available from the publisher. That being said, individual other ports besides PC are vaulted. Next, the PC Hirameki English version. Released on December 20th, 2005, and of course only in English. Shows up on eBay for around $150 usually. Today I found one that was way more than that, but usually for around $150. There's a fan-made patch called the HIMMEL patch that does some cosmetic changes and fixes typos, and will be discussed in detail later if this is the whole video. I'm going to take this section and chop it out as a standalone video possibly, in which case I will not discuss this later. You have to watch the whole Ever17 part 34 for that. But this patch is definitely not required. It fixes typos and is cosmetic changes. You don't have to apply this patch if you don't want to. The typos aren't so egregious that the game is not understandable. They are subtle. They are like, they're just kind of goofy. You see a little typo here and there. There is also a couple plot mistakes that they made, but that fixes. Again, it's not really egregious. So don't feel compelled to have to apply the HIMMEL patch, but you can if you want to. Runs fine on Windows 10. There are absolutely no problems running this on Windows 10 whatsoever. Unlike the Japanese version, there's no font problems. So, yeah. I mean, the intro cutscene works. Everything works. So, perfectly backwards compatible. I read somewhere that some of the discs, the background music doesn't work. That's all I know about that. On mine, my discs, the background music works fine. Also, some of the earlier discs, they don't have the Japanese voice acting. I don't think this was actually a mistake. I think Hirameki just thought that the United States or North American audience didn't necessarily care for the Japanese voice acting, right? They just want the text. However, they later decided to put the voice.dat, is what that file is called, on their website, and it was added to later versions of the game. My copy, because I actually have a physical copy of the Hirameki translation, does not have the voice files. So now the voice files would be a very good thing to put on the Internet Archive. That sounds like something that would be what the Internet Archive is made for, and a good thing to put there. But unfortunately, they're not. Instead, they have the entire kit and caboodle. We can pirate the entire game off the Internet Archive. Well, so anyway, that's why my Let's Play had the voice files, because I pirated the entire game, essentially. But it would be nice if someone would host just the voice files. If you have a version where you have the small voice files, like the 35 megabyte one, which doesn't have the voice acting, if you copy in the one from like a pirated version, it will work. It will add the voice acting to the other version. It's not like it's like serial number locked or anything like that. Also, I took there's also a voice.dat in the Japanese version, and I copied that into the Hirameki English version install directory, and that also works. It's a different file size. It's 505 megabytes according to Windows, right? Remember, Windows has that 1024 base byte thing going on, as opposed to 440. So the file size is a little bit bigger on the Japanese version, but it works. So again, the Japanese version is really hard to come by, so good luck getting that file, but it does actually work and add the voice acting to the English version if you want to do it that way. Okay. For an English speaker, this is the best way to play the game, even if it's unpatched, in my opinion. And after you install it off the disk, it doesn't have anything where it requires you to put like the disk back in. At least mine. I think there might have been some other versions that do. With my copy of the disks, you can just install it and it just goes, and you don't need the disks anymore after the install. Xbox port. Released in December 1st, 2011, Japanese only. So this is not just a port. I should say Xbox 360, because it's not the original Xbox 360. This is not just a port, it's a remake. So keep that in mind. It was released in Japan only, and only in Japanese language. It costs in the 100 second hand. Mine cost 140, if you're wondering. The Xbox 360 does have region locking, and a Japanese region Xbox 360 is required for it to run. It does run on Xenia. To run on Xenia, you do need an ISO. I'll talk about that a little bit later, as in after I talk about this. So this is a remake. It's a complete rewrite of the text. And it does have resemblance to the original story. Like, it has the same characters with the same names. But there are many and very significant changes. And the fan base considers it inferior to the original. I will get back and talk about this in more detail later on in this video if you're watching the entire Ever17 Part 34. If you're watching this as a standalone, then I talk about it in the whole big long video. Because this is supposed to be a non-spoiler standalone, I'm not going to talk about the details of how it's different here. Now, as far as Xenia is concerned, so you're doing the ISO to run it on Xenia. To get the ISO, the easiest way by far is to have a Japanese region Xbox 360 and then use a program, install it, take the flash, a flash drive, take the flash drive, stick it in your computer, and run a program called God to ISO. And you'll get a disk image that's like, I think, 3.5 gigabytes or something. That works. If there might be a way to do it without a Japanese version Xbox 360. However, it's very difficult. And I know that I'm pretty certain there is, because there's actually someone posted on the Internet Archive an ISO of the 360, like of an ISO that's like an entire DVD-R double-sided, the size of the entire disc. So it appears they did it with some sort of palette swap technique. But it's really hard to do, and you might need a very rare format of disc in order to get it to work, called a DVD minus R dual layered, which is really rare and really hard to buy. So to get the ISO, if you don't want to be a pirate and download the ISO from somewhere, which no one wants to be a pirate, right? No one wants to do that. No one will do that. Don't do that. Don't do that, people. Anyway, you need a Japanese region Xbox 360 anyway in order to get the disk image to run it on Xenia, because Xenia can't run things directly just put into an optical drive. If you're not familiar with Xenia, Xenia is a Xbox 360 emulator. It's kind of not perfect. It's somewhat unstable. But it's the only Xbox 360 emulator out there, and the game does run on it. So, if you want to record a Let's Play, there is some advantage of still actually running it on an actual Xbox and using a capture card as opposed to using Xenia, just because Xenia is is glitchy and crashy. Whereas if you were to run it on an actual Xbox, it would be more stable. The advantage of running on Xenia is you don't have to have that Xbox sitting on your table, adding its fan noise and taking up its space. Anyway, let's move on to the next one, which is Remember 11. And go through the various ports and their availability here. First is the PS2 port, released on March 18th, 2004. And released in Japanese only, and only to Japanese in Japan, although you can import it secondhand. It goes on eBay for as low as $22, including shipping, which I saw goes as $10 plus 11 shipping, which adds up to 21. My math doesn't make any sense, so I don't know what's going on here. But anyway, so. Yeah, it goes for as low as $10, but you gotta check the shipping cost, right? If the shipping cost is as much as a thing. But some people try to sell it for more, particularly if it's the limited edition version, right? So it's but it's really cheap, the PS2 version of Remember 11. The PS2 did have region locking, so it may be region locked to Japan, so you might need to have a Japanese region PS2. This has been bypassed. Again, I don't know how to do it, and I've never done it. I don't have a PS2. I never tried to bypass region locking on a PS2. I just know I've just read somewhere that it can be done. So anyway, then also it was released for the PSP on April 16th, 2009, in Japanese, but it can be translated to English via a fan translation. It goes for greater than $25 on eBay plus shipping. I always note plus shipping because when it's down that low, because then the shipping cost starts to become comparable to the actual price. But 25 plus shipping, and it gets almost down to 25. Remember 11 for some reason is cheaper than Ever7 and Ever17. I don't know why. It's not like it's a particularly worse game. In fact, I really like Remember 11. So, yeah, I don't know why it doesn't deserve to be this cheap. Again, to apply the fan translation, you have to dump the UMD using a hacked PSP. The PSP can be emulated, and the PSP is not region locked, so you can play on any PSP regardless of the region. Apparently, it can be played on a hacked PS Vita as well. Next, PC Physical, released on April 4th, 2008. Again, Japanese, but can be translated to English via fan translation. I'll describe that more in detail. It can't really be translated to English via fan translation anymore. Anyway, this is the only one for some reason on this document that I mentioned it came in a box set. I don't know why. Never7, Ever17 also came in that box set. I think it's more because when this was released on PC, that's when the box set started. Anyway, so, this is exclusive. Okay, yeah, okay. So I guess the PC version in Japanese, the PC version of Remember 11 was exclusively in the box set. You couldn't get it by itself. That's why I mentioned the box set so prominently here. So it came in a box set with Never7, Ever17, and 12 Riven. Extremely scarce, essentially unobtainable. Again, I have one because I have the box set. But I still stand by it's extremely scarce, essentially unobtainable, because it is. I have one. Has a fan translation to English, and it's called the TLWiki patch. The TLWiki is part of the Internet Archive. The problem with this is that I couldn't find anywhere where you could download just the patch by itself. Like you actually have your own disk, and then you apply the patch to it. I could only find where you could download it, the entire kit and caboodle pre-patched. Meaning, the fan translation of it, it's like you can only do it by pirating the entire thing. Which makes it effectively kind of like a pirate-only patch, somewhat reminiscent of the Eternal Edition for Never7. Anyway, there is a fan revision to the TLWiki English patch on top of the TLWiki English patch by the same people who made the HIMMEL patch for Ever17 called the Gestalt edition. I didn't apply it in my Let's Play, but it's out there and you can apply it if you want to. And it fixes some grammar issues, is essentially what it does, as far as I understand. And then it does not appear to require the physical disk to play after install. You just install it, and once it's installed, you can kind of move on, right? You don't have to keep putting the disk in to play it. And I didn't actually mention it here. For some reason, I forgot to put this bullet point. I'll add it right now. But it runs perfectly fine on Windows 10. And I presume that also means Windows 11 as well. It doesn't appear to have any of the font issues that Never7 or Ever17 have. The font is the correct size, no intro video issues, and no full screen issues, no doesn't launch issues, none of that stuff. It just works perfectly fine on Windows 10. Okay, and then like Ever17 and Never7, there were iOS and Android ports. Again, I don't know anything about these. I don't know when if they're still up there. I put whether or not they're only on the Japanese version of the App Store. I don't know any of this. If anybody knows the answer to any of my questions about Android and iOS ports that show up over and over again, could you please tell me in the comments? Next, the DMM version. So again, like Never7, because remember I couldn't find the Ever17 DMM version. It's only for digital download on DMM.com. Again, you need to be in Japan or use a VPN to pretend to be in Japan or to buy it and download it. Because it exists, and I don't know why this is duplicated. Cesaro might be. Yeah, okay. It is. There's no why it is. Because this exists, that means the game is not actually out of print or out of production. It is not technically abandonware or in a vault, at least for PC. The chances that the TLWiki fan translation would work on it are vanishingly small. Then again, I couldn't find where you could download the TLWiki fan executable, like the translation, just the translating bit, and not the whole game already translated by itself. So that discussion may be moot anyway. And last time I checked, it costed 1228 yen on DMM. Okay, next, 12 Riven. So first we have the PS2 port, which released on March 13th, 2008, and in Japanese only. Just to get this out of the way, all of the ports for 12 Riven are in Japanese only. There were no English commercial or fan translations for 12 Riven. I've read somewhere that someone's he said, she said rumor that someone created one that was almost complete and never released it. Again, don't take that as gospel or quote me on that. But I did read it somewhere. Anyway, so going back to the PS2 port. So the PS2 port goes on eBay for as low as $22, just like Remember 11. And I'm saying $22 because I said $10 plus $11 shipping. Again, 10 plus 11 doesn't equal 22, it equals 21. I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote the script. That's just, I reinvented math there. Deal with it. The PS2 does have region locking again, so it may be region locked to Japan. Again, I know it's possible to bypass region locking on the PS2. I've never done it. I don't know how to do it. Okay, next. PSP, released on April 16th, 2009, the same date the PSP version of Remember 11 was released. Goes for about $50 on eBay. The PSP can be emulated, is playable on a PS Vita that is hacked, and the PSP is not region locked. You can play it on any PSP that you want to. Unlike the first three entries in the Infinity series, there is no fan translation for it. So there just isn't. So it's Japanese only. And lastly, we have the PC version, which was released on April 4th, 2008. Came by itself, or it was added to the Infinity Plus box set. Is extremely scarce and essentially unobtainable. Again, I have one because I have the box set. Requires the disc to be in the optical drive in order for it to run. So this is unlike Ever17 and unlike Remember 11. It has this anti-piracy measure where it just won't launch if you don't have the disc in your drive. There theoretically could be more comments on that, but I'm gonna hold off. So next, Code 18. Code 18 kind of stands out because it wasn't written by, 12 Riven stands out because it wasn't originally meant to be labeled as Infinity Series. It was supposed to be its own series called the Integral Series, but then Kid went out of business and they didn't actually keep creating more entries into the Integral Series, and so they decided to incorporate it into the Infinity Series, and the fans kind of think of it like that too. They just kind of think of it as a fourth Infinity game. But it was not originally supposed to be branded as an Infinity game. Code 18 sticks out in that it was not actually written by Kutaro Uchikoshi. It was Cyberfront's desire to keep doing the Infinity series, so they just hired new authors. They did it with different authors. So it's supposed to be like the Infinity series, but it's not written by the same people that wrote the Infinity series. So it was released for PSP September 29th, 2011 in Japanese only, and that goes for at least $30 on eBay. So the lowest it goes to $30, but it goes for $30 and up. The PSP can be emulated, of course. It is playable on the PS Vita if you hack it. And as I said before several times, a PSP is not region locked. You can play it on any PSP. Next, PSP, PC Physical. December 21st, released on December 21st, 2012. and of course in Japanese only. There is no fan translations or commercial translations of Code 18. Came by itself or bundled with Ever17. Extremely scarce, essentially unobtainable. So it does not come in the Infinity Plus box set. It only came in a bundle with Ever17. I couldn't find either the bundle or by itself. I don't have the physical PC port for Code 18 because I couldn't find it, so I don't have it. Next, Xbox 360. So this was released on September 29th, 2011. It was also released only in Japanese, only in Japan. There's no commercial translation or fan translation or anything like that. I got mine for $30 on eBay, though last time I checked, the listings were higher. So I guess I kind of got a good deal on that because the price has gone up since then. But mine was about $30. The Xbox 360 does have region locking, so although I'm not certain about this like I am with the Xbox remake of Ever17, I'm like 99% sure, just not 100% sure, that it requires a Japanese region Xbox 360 to run. And I don't know why I didn't say this when I was talking about the Xbox remake of Ever17, but both of them are not on all the forward compatibility lists that I have found for the Xbox One and the Xbox Series X. So there are some games on the Xbox 360, including some games on the original Xbox, they'll run on an Xbox Series. There are some forwards compatible games. There's some backwards compatibility with the Xbox Series. But there are a lot of lists online of lists of games that work. And I haven't found on any of those lists Code 18 and Ever17. And this doesn't mean for absolute certainty that they won't run on the Xbox Series X. Not because things will run that aren't on the list, but because they might have passed it over because they are Japanese region. And the people who wrote these lists weren't considering non-North American games or something like that. Right? So there could have been like a journalistic oversight. So I can't know for absolute certainty that they won't run on Xbox Series X. You definitely need the X because you need a physical drive. But it's very unlikely that they will. Okay. It will run on Xenia, but it's very difficult to dump an ISO without having a Japanese Xbox 360. So you're going to need a Japanese region Xbox 360 anyway. And unlike Ever17, no one put an ISO of this on the Internet Archive. So you really need the physical one to play Code 18. I'm not going to dig into any deep, dark places to find ISOs beyond that. Okay? So that's it for all that. And then I think as a conclusion, to my description of the availability, as far as I know, I was able to research of the Infinity Series games. I'll show some pictures. So if I can work this correctly here, this image here is my collection of discs. So those white case covers the case covers from the Infinity Plus box set, they are really bad, and I might want to buy some new cases. They didn't really think about like the longevity of the packaging when it came to those discs. And then this is a picture of the Xbox remake of Ever17 running. There's my Japanese region Xbox 360. I don't have a flash drive in it at the moment. When I took this picture, I just ran it right off the disc. But there's my HDMI cord going from the Xbox 360 into one of my monitors. And then I don't have a good desk set up right there. I was just doing it kind of like hurriedly. And then this is a picture of Code 18 being brought up on my Japanese region Xbox 360. Because it's the only viable way I could think of to play Code 18. So there's my little setup there. So that's going to end the standalone video part. If you watched the standalone video, which I may or may not make, thank you for watching that. And I'm going to go back to the big long video. So let's keep going.